I guess up top, I want to say that we surveyed our audience and overwhelmingly they said that climate change was the biggest issue that they had. Well, 89% said that they didn't actually feel inspired by politics, but they knew that there were a lot of concerns that they had. Why do you think so many people don't feel inspired by or engaged with in politics, even though they have all these big concerns?
Look, my best guess is a couple of things. I think that in Australia, politics of climate have been 20 years of arguments and not much progress. If you're a young person, I can understand a high degree of cynicism to say politicians have been spending 20 years arguing about whether climate change is real, let alone whether we should do anything about it or what we should do about it. An argument about what we should do about climate change is very legitimate, right? But an argument about whether climate change is real or not is very unproductive. But the country's by and large been doing that for 20 years and is now in a new phase where some people are arguing, in effect, we shouldn't do anything about climate change because they want nuclear. We'll maybe come to that later. But so I think there's that. And then also I think that politics, and I'm going to defend politics in a minute, but I think politics can be seen as, well, not really, when they're talking about this policy or that policy, but all I want is the issue fixed. So it's hard to sort of take the policies that we're implementing and then sort of turn that into sort of tangible action that people can see and understand. That's a challenge for us, right? But maybe if I could just defend politics for a minute and say politics, parliament, politics, government is how you get your hands on the big levers to change the country. And no bigger lever than climate change policy, right? To change it, we've changed the direction of the country in the last 2 years on climate change. We can get into that more detail, but no other, as important as other work is, it's actually that which gets it done. So if you actually care about climate change, which 89% of your respondents did, then politics is really what really counts. So we've got to find ways of making that more real and relevant to people.
How do you suggest then that young people engage more in politics, especially with hopefully getting more young people actually to run for local governments and things like that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is to be involved, right? You've got to actually be involved in a political party. Obviously, I have a particular political party I'd like people to be involved in, but, even if it's not my political party, get involved. I know it's not the sexiest thing to do to, get online and join the Labor Party online or whatever, but it's actually the essential first part, because that is actually how you make a change and get involved, right? I understand, peaceful protests, and, I respect that and understand and accept it's got a role, but it doesn't change the levers, right? Getting engaged in the serious discussions about what we're going to do about an issue inside a political party is very, very valuable, more valuable than I think other forms of protest in terms of moving and encouraging behavioural change in political parties, in governments and in countries.
I mean, speaking on protest, do you think the recent school for climate strikes, do you think that they helped put at least some pressure on the government, and maybe you took notice of a few of them to be like, okay, this is an overwhelming amount of young people who are engaged in it?
No, because I don't need to be told that young people care about climate change. I know that, right? So again, no disrespect to the people engaged in those activities. Like, I understand and respect it, but the idea that if 50,000 people come to this rally, nothing's going to happen. But if 100,000 people do, the government's going to listen. It's just not how we think about these things, right? And likewise, again, if a much smaller scale, but if a protest turns up at my electorate office and sits in the foyer, and as long as they're peaceful and they let the constituents come and go, I've got no problem with that. But it doesn't change the way I think about the issue. I think about the issue because I want action on climate change, right? So again, I respect it, but I don't think it's the most productive way of engaging in talking to governments about what we can do. I mean, I've had great meetings with young people, Australian Youth Climate Coalition or Alliance, I think they're called, really good. They have strong views and want to push government to do more, but sit down for an hour and talk through the issues and explain why we're doing what we're doing and the way we're doing it and get their feedback. And sometimes, I think it's a two-way conversation. Like, there've been things I've said to them that they didn't know about, and they all think, oh, well, from his point of view, now maybe I can understand why they're doing it that way. But also, two-way street, tell me what you think, and that's valuable to me. That dialogue is more valuable than than, holding a placard and yelling, because that's not the way to convince people, right? Somebody yells at me and holds a placard, that's not going to convince me, frankly. Sitting down and having a chat, much better chance.
In your view, I suppose a nutshell, what is the Labor government doing on climate change, and I guess your plans for the future of Australia in terms of really bringing down emissions and meeting the targets and I guess preventing further climate harm?
So we're doing massive amounts, right? But we're doing it sort of in stages. So we're doing one thing, doing it well, best we can, and then moving on to the next thing, because you can't do it all at once, right? So we passed a Climate Act. Australia hadn't had one for 10 years. That's important because it sets the framework, tells the renewable energy investors Australia's changed, Australia's open for business, Australia wants renewable energy investment, Australia's got government targets locked in legislation. Young people might say, what does that mean? Well, it means a lot, right? It's changed the policy of the country, and it's sent a message to those companies. You want to do business in Australia? Very welcome. Come and help us meet our climate change targets. And then we've gone through step by step. I won't bore you with all of it, but we're building to 82% renewable energy in our energy system by 2030. It was 30% when we came to office, to 82% in what's now 6 years. That's a big job. It's going to be hard, but we'll get it done. For every kilowatt of renewable energy you have, that's one less kilowatt of fossil fuels you need. So getting that 82% is really important. We've done other things. The most recent one was transport. Transport's our third biggest emitting sector. On track to be our biggest emitting sector if we don't act. We were the only country in the world, only major country in the world, apart from Russia, without standards for our cars, emission standards, to say to the car companies, send us efficient vehicles, send us low emissions vehicles. We're requiring you to under law. I'd say to the car companies, why don't you send us more EVs, better cars? Oh, because you don't make us. All right, well, we'll fix that. We've still to get through the Parliament, but we've changed that policy to say, no, Australia will have vehicle efficiency standards. So sector by sector, hard grind, bit by bit, you get real emissions reduction.
And speaking on the future gas strategy, there's been a bit of criticism on it, especially from some environmentalists and particularly young people as well, who may not understand how having a gas strategy helps bring down further emissions or move away from fossil fuels.
Yeah, no, I very much understand that. And I think the future gas strategy is really a way of saying, guys, we're going to need gas for a while. We're going to get to 82% renewable, but that still leaves 18% fossil fuels, right? And actually that 82 to 100 drive is really hard work, because you can imagine, getting from 30 to 50, well, that's, it's like what we call low-hanging fruit. It's the last mile is really hard. I'm not here to, sort of promote gas, but I will say it has one big virtue when you're building a renewable system. That is, it's flexible. So you can turn gas on and off at 2 minutes' notice. All right. So people say gas is high emissions. Yeah, it is, but it's not when it's turned off. Whereas coal's on all the time. Right. You turn a coal-fired power station on, you turn it off 40 years later. It's running. You just can't turn them on and off. You can't turn nuclear on and off either. But you can turn gas on and off. So that's really useful as we're building to renewables to have gas in the system to say, if at night we're short because there hasn't been enough sun during the day and it's not windy, we're going to need something extra. We'll turn the gas on. Right? Turn it on at 6 o'clock at night. Turn it off at 10 o'clock at night when everyone's gone to bed. Or if it runs through to 9 o'clock the next morning when the sun starts shining. That's still a lot better than having coal running all day, right? And then you've also got industries which need gas. Well, we're building green hydrogen, right? But it's not ready yet, and they're going to need gas for a long time. And you've got 5 million Australian homes on gas for heating and cooking. And, it'd be great if they could all switch to electricity straight away, but it's expensive. Right? 80% of houses in Victoria are on gas for heating. We've got to make sure that they get enough gas while we're doing that. So it was really a way of saying that. Now, what some people, I think, thought about the gas strategy was, this is the government softening us up to spend government money on gas. No, we're not spending government money on gas. Right? The budget last night was all about renewable energy. It wasn't about new money for gas. No new money for gas. Lots of new money for renewable energy. And I think, and I understand why people thought that. They thought, they put this out just before the budget. They must be about to spend billions on gas, which was never the case.
I think as well, there were some concerns when the former Liberal government led by Scott Morrison had his gas recovery project, to which you labelled a fraud.
And it was. It still was. It always was. And it still is, yes.
What I suppose is the key difference between that strategy and this new one?
Yeah. Well, because they were proposing to spend government money on gas and said it was the answer to all the problems. Gas-led recovery. No, that's not right. It's not the answer to all the problems.
Yeah.
We're not proposing to spend government money on gas extraction. What we are saying, though, to people honestly is we are going to need some new gas from time to time, right? Because the Bass Strait's running out. We've been getting gas out of the Bass Strait since the 1970s. It's not a renewable resource. It runs out. It's running out. We're getting less and less gas out of the Bass Strait. You've got 5 million Australian homes on gas. You've got industry that needs gas. We are going to need to, from time to time, approve some new gas. So that's why I say the gas-led recovery is an unhelpful and inaccurate statement. No new gas is actually also unhelpful and inaccurate, right? I know it's attractive to be able to, give a broad sweeping statement. But actually, hard policy means actually you can't do those two extremes. I'll tell you this, as we build to 82% renewable, if we start having blackouts because we don't have enough gas, you're going to lose community support for renewables real quick. So we're going to go backwards in the climate change debate, and we need to bring the community with us. Young people are passionate about climate change, but not everyone is. But they are happy for action on climate change, providing power remains cheap and it's reliable, etc. So we've got to keep those people with us, and of course we want to ensure reliable energy. Renewable energy is very reliable with the right settings, but it's not imperfect, right? We also need some backups, and gas is a key backup.
Speaking of communities, there's concerns with gas projects that infiltrate and kind of go onto traditional land from Indigenous communities. Especially, there was a lot of contention with the 3.6 billion Santos Narrabri gas project. Do you see the potential contradictory aims of that, of advocating for climate legislation and then doing it on Indigenous lands that could...
These are all, I do believe in full, prior, informed, free consent. But this is the case across the board. I'm doing offshore wind. First Nations groups have different views. There's some First Nations groups who are strongly supportive of what we're doing and working with us. Other First Nations groups have concerns and oppose what we're doing. Right? So we consult, but ultimately we've got to make decisions. And there's native title land where First Nations people are the owners, and there's non-native title land where they should be consulted, but actually somebody else is under law the owner, right? So there are different regimes in place. So I think that applies for gas, applies for renewable energy, applies for everything. We're developing with First Nations people a First Nations clean energy strategy for the first time. Hasn't been done before, and I see big opportunities. In Canada, 20% of renewable energy is owned by First Nations people. In Australia, it's less than 1%. Right? There's a lot we can do. So I hear you about gas and First Nations. And again, to be very honest with you, not all First Nations people have the same views. There are some First Nations groups who support gas in their communities, others who oppose it. If we're genuinely respectful of that conversation, we've got to respect different views.
But I guess I want to know a bit more about how the Labor government does propose to balance those tensions a little bit more, and if there's more sway on those Indigenous communities or on the, financial impact of having those companies come in and weld them and drill them and things like that.
Well, again, I think one of the key criteria for any approval, whether it's renewable or fossil fuels or anything else, is if it's on native title land, the native title holders are the owners of the land. If it's not on native title land, have the First Nations traditional owners been consulted, and what are their views? And again, even on a particular project, you see, particular projects can cover various tribal lands, and I've seen examples where one land council's for it and another land council's against it, right? So these are difficult issues to work through, and they take time. In my experience, most of these issues can be talked through with time. You've got to take the time for proper consultation. The First Nations consultation can't happen, on the same timeline as perhaps we'd like it to get jobs done.
I think as well that a lot of young people feel I guess we touched on earlier, feel quite a lot of anger about climate change, and obviously they feel a lot of frustration about it. How can you make them feel a little bit more optimistic about the future, especially their future as well, about how we move forward with the climate?
Climate change is the centre of our government's policy. It was the centre of last night's budget. It's what gets me out of bed every morning. Like, not every young person will agree with everything I say or do, and I've got a different job to do, right? I've got to keep the energy system running while we're doing this transition, etc. So, but be under no misapprehension about how seriously I take it, the government takes it. And, some people say 1.5 degrees, it's gone, we can't do it. It's hard, but I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up for future generations. And if we fail to get to 1.5 degrees of warming, I've got to tell you the difference between getting to 1.6 and 1.8 is huge for future generations, right? So we just got to keep driving for it. And also, I prefer to focus on the optimistic side. If we get this right, how many jobs will be created? Well, great jobs for young people in clean energy and renewable energy. And the future, if we get it right, is very strong. And I'm being pretty determined to restore Australia to climate leadership. We're now much more respected around the world as a result of that climate leadership. And, we have delegations of young people to COP every year. I spend time with them. And I like to think that they see that actually Australia's back at the top table. So I understand the despair, but I'd encourage people to really focus on what we can do together. And also, I'd just say this, climate change politics can be very tribal. The fossil fuel industry says, any sort of investment in renewable energy takes away from fossil fuels. The renewable energy, like the climate change groups say, well, we've got to do all this tomorrow, and if you don't do this, then it's a failure. No, we're doing a lot. We might not do this bit that you don't like. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Even if you don't agree with 100%, don't let that 20% you don't agree with infect your views about the 80% that we are doing that you do agree with, because I hope I'm making sort of clear points, but I think that can infect the discussion and really lead to disenchantment when actually a lot of good stuff is happening.
Speaking of the budget last night, there were a few suggestions that there should be a stronger fossil fuel tax in there. And we currently, I believe, only tax large fossil fuel corporations 1/15 in income tax. Do you think that that should have been stronger or more in the budget? Or do you think that that's a sign of we're still weaseling out fossil fuels, so there's less need to do that?
Well, I think all the above can be true, in that fossil fuels will play a reducing role in our economy. But we have actually also increased the tax take from gas, or we're trying to. It's yet to be clear whether that will pass the Parliament. Because this is part of what I'm saying about tribalism. The Liberals are against it because they don't want gas to pay more tax. The Greens are against it because they say we should be charging even more tax, so they'll vote against what we are charging. There's a current sort of position. So we might not get it through. Which, if you want gas companies paying more tax, you should want us to get it through, right? Even if you think we could do more, take the billions of dollars on offer and then argue for more. We are doing what we think we need to do, but even that, we are struggling at this point to get through the Parliament.
What do you make of the opposition's proposed use of nuclear power?
It's an excuse to keep coal. It's not. They don't believe it, right? The smart ones, they know it's not real. But what they even say, David Littleproud even says the quiet bit out loud. He says we need to keep the coal longer. We need to slow down the renewables. So what they're really saying is, slow down the renewables because nuclear is coming. Nuclear does take a while, but that's okay, it's coming. So in the meantime, we'll keep the coal. Now, it's a fraud, right? But what it could, if they were successful, it would achieve its result of keeping coal in longer. That's what it's all about. Slowing down the transition is what it's all about. It's also the most expensive form of energy available, right? But it's a particularly slow form of energy, and they're comfortable with that because they want to keep the coal for as long as possible.
What has been, do you think, your proudest achievement as the Minister for Climate Change?
It's a nice question. Thank you. I think probably the safeguards reforms, which we didn't really talk about, but they're the reforms to get emissions down in big industry. very hard to do. Like, it was a big struggle to get that through the Parliament. I'm pretty pleased with that, and proud of that, if you want to say proud, because that was very hard. And again, the transport emissions standards, the new vehicle emission standards, efficiency standards, ministers have tried that for 20 years and failed. Like, multiple ministers have had a go at doing that. I've still got to get it through Parliament, but having changed the government policy to do it, I'm proud of that, because that's been in the too hard basket for 20 years. Australia right out there on our own, not having them, and we're fixing that, and I'm proud of that. But I just say this, I'm pleased with what we've done in the first 2 years, but I'm not satisfied yet, because we've got a lot more to do.
I guess, yeah, what do you hope the future looks like should Labor be re-elected in your plans?
Well, a renewable energy superpower by 2030. That's what I'm driving. That's what gets me out of bed every day. Become a renewable energy superpower. Create lots of good jobs and reduce a lot of emissions, not just for Australia. Like, our own emissions are important. Some people say, only 1% doesn't count. I say, no, the 1% does count a lot. Like, every percent counts. But I do say this, what we can do even more is help other countries reduce emissions by our green exports. That's what last night's budget was all about. Green hydrogen, renewable energy, critical minerals necessary for batteries, battery manufacturing, making solar panels in Australia. All that, we can help the rest of the world decarbonise, because we have the best renewable resources in the world. We've got room. Renewable energy takes space. We've got plenty of it. Think of Singapore, great country, love it. Don't have any room, right? So they struggle. So we can help them and countries like them decarbonise, and that's what drives my agenda.
That's all the questions I had. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that you think our audience?
It's been great, Kyle. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good on you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.